For teenagers went camping by a peaceful lake in Finland. By morning, 3 were brutally murdered, and the only survivor claimed he saw a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. But 44 years later, police accused the survivor himself. So what really happened at Lake Bodom? Okay, let's get into today's story. On the afternoon of June 4th, 1960, a 15-year-old girl named MB Yorkland climbed off the back of her boyfriend's motorcycle. Her boyfriend was an 18-year-old named Nils Gustafsson, and this couple had just driven 18 miles from the city in southern Finland where they lived to get to this beautiful forest and lake where they along. With another couple were going to go camping. The other couple, who was still a few minutes behind them, was Nils's best friend Seppo and his girlfriend whose name was Onja. As Nils parked his motorcycle, Mae looked out over the lake and she saw it was totally beautiful. The forest completely wrapped around the lake, and there were all these people out on the lake, boating and swimming and having a great time. But despite all these people here to Mae, it still kind of felt very quiet and peaceful. This didn't feel like a big touristy destination. It really felt like they were out in the wild, and for me who love the outdoors, you know, this felt like a great spot to celebrate her 16th birthday day. That's actually why the couples were out camping. Me was turning 16 in a couple of days, and so this was going to be her party. Just then me heard another motorcycle approaching, and she turned around and she saw it was the other couple. It was Seppo who was driving, and Onja was right behind him. And Seo, he looked up and saw me looking at him, and he grinned and braked hard with his motorcycle and kind of swung the back wheel out like he was in an action movie, and me thought it was totally funny, and she started laughing. And that's when Nils turned around and he saw his girlfriend laughing hardly at Seo. A moment later, all four friends were giving each other hugs and saying hello. And then after catching up, the friends walked over to the small shack that was right by the water. It was the snack kiosk. Their plan was to load up on supplies and then quickly make their way into the forest, where they'd actually be camping and just relax, enjoy the night and go to bed. But as the friends walked towards the snack kiosk, Seppo made a joke about how his motorcycle was way better than Nils's motorcycle, and me, who was Nils's boyfriend, she laughed at this joke and thought it was really funny. But as she was laughing, she happened to look over at Nils, her own boyfriend, and she could tell, you know, he just looked upset like he was scowling at her and also at Seppo. And immediately me felt really bad because she was thinking, you know, maybe Nils thinks I am flirting with Seppo by laughing at all of his jokes, and so me really did not want Nils to think anything was going on with her and Seppo, because there was nothing going on. But when me looked over at Nils again to kind of confirm that he really did look mad, he didn't look mad, he was smiling and laughing again. And so me told herself, you know, she must have just imagined that Nils was never upset. It was all in her head. So me reached over and grabbed Nils's hand, and the two couples walked the rest of the way over to the kiosk. The snack kiosk was really just this little shack right near the beach, and then behind the shack was a small house where the owners of the snack kiosk lived. And as soon as they got up to the kiosk, me noticed the woman who was manning the kiosk had her back to them and didn't seem remotely interested in turning around and helping them get what they needed. And so me was just like, okay, hey, excuse me, we just want to buy something. And the woman at this point, she whipped her head around and she looked at me really angrily and just said, what do you want? And me, who was totally taken back by this, she kind of mumbled an apology, not really even sure if she did something wrong or not. And then she asked the woman if they could just get a couple of beers and sodas, and they'd be on their way. And as this is happening, Seppo and Onja, who were right behind me, they were just giggling the whole time, because this woman's behavior was so bizarre and so unexpected they just couldn't help themselves. So, as the teenagers are giggling, this woman is bending down and getting the sodas and beer, and she is huffing really angrily like, this is such a huge inconvenience. And then she just slammed him up on the counter as the woman was punching in the total into the cash register. Maa found herself looking over at the house behind the shack where this woman presumably lived, and me noticed there were all these empty beer bottles that lined the front railing of the house. And so me figured, you know, maybe this was a clue as to why this woman was so hostile any household that produced that many empty beer cans likely was not a very happy place to live. And so finally the woman in the kiosk gave the teenagers their total, at which point Nils stepped forward, and he actually paid for the stuff instead of me, and then as Niels and me grabbed the things they bought and were about to turn and leave, the woman in the kiosk kind of cleared her voice, and she asked them, hey, are you camping out by the lake? And to me it seemed like this woman was suddenly being really nice, maybe as a way to kind of make up for how rude she was when they first walked over, and so me put on a smile and told this woman that we Ray staying out by the lake, we Ray really excited about it, thanks for asking. But the woman did not seem happy to hear this. Instead the woman kind of scowled and then told them that they better set their tent as far away from here as possible. None of the teenagers had any idea how to respond to this, so they just kind of stood there, and there was this really intense awkward silence for a moment, and then the kiosk lady just began literally shoo the teenagers away, telling them to go get out of here. And so finally the teenagers did turn around and started walking. But after walking pretty far away from the kiosk, they heard the kiosk woman yell out at them one more time. She basically yelled at them that her and her family had already had lots of trouble with wild teenagers in the past camping out around this lake, and so now she and her husband were totally sick of it. And so after the kiosk lady yelled out this final comment, Seppo and Nils and Onja, they just started laughing because it just seemed so absurd how disrespectful and awful this woman was being, to the point where it was comical. But me, she did and think it was funny. She seemed mean and very angry, and it totally freaked me out. But just a couple of minutes later the teens were back at their motorcycles, and Nils and me hopped on one and Seo and Onja hopped on the other, and then they began driving down this wooded path that would take them to their campsite. The ride to their campsite was a very short one, and where they were positioned was on this piece of land that sort of jutted out onto the lake. It was very heavily forested, and so it has this amazing view of the water, but it is very secluded in the trees. And so right away Nils and Seppo, they parked their motorcycles up against the trees. They pulled out a simple canvas tent,
and they strung it up between two birch trees.
And then with their campsite all set up, they grabbed some beers and the friends began to drink, and it didn't take long before me had totally forgotten about the kiosk woman and how awful she had been after all me had really been looking forward to this trip. And now she was here at the campsite relaxing with her friends. This was great. Also May was really excited about her relationship with Nils. It was a relatively new one, and it was obvious that for once her boyfriend was somebody who liked her as much as she liked him. And also Nils was very handsome, and he was popular, and he had this dark brown hair that he combed straight up, and he always wore this leather jacket everywhere, and so Em just really liked being around him. He was super cool and made her feel really grown up. After sitting around for about 30 minutes to an hour just having a couple of drinks and swapping stories and kind of easing into their night, the friends eventually made their way down to the water, and they went swimming for a while, and they continued to drink down by the dock. And then when they were tired of swimming, the teens just laid on the dock and enjoyed looking out at the sunset, even though actually in Finland at this time of the year it is not really a sunset because the sun does not actually fully set. And so when this happens, these are known as white nights, which are very beautiful. It is kind of like this hazy glow in the sky from the sun not quite setting. And so on this night that the teens are out there on the dock, they had this beautiful white night to look up at, and for me she felt like this was the perfect birthday celebration. In fact, she would jot down in her diary later that night just how amazing everything was going and how much fun she was having with Nils and their friends. Finally the teens were done down by the dock, so they grabbed their things. They went back up to the campsite, they dried off, they changed, and then all four of them piled into their one little tent to go to sleep. Eventually all four of them would drift off to sleep, but then at some point in the middle of the night May woke up and she heard rustling sounds outside the tent. And so she wondered if maybe one of the friends had gotten up, and so she sat up and looked out the tent, and she couldn't see anything. She just saw the kind of hazy night sky from the white night, and she couldn't really tell if everybody was inside the tent or not. But then suddenly a dark shadowy figure moved in front of the tent flap, the open tent flap. And so this shadowy figure totally blocked all the light that was coming into the tent from the white night. And then this shadowy figure looked into the tent, and they had these bright glowing red eyes, and before me or anybody else in the tent could do anything, there was a snapping sound and the tent fell down on top of them.